Hello everyone, this is Peak Entertainment and we're back again, and here now we have another video for you and another look at movies that I deem 10 out of 10, and in this edition we will focus on one of the all-time great movies of the 1980s, and that is the sci-fi classic Robocop. Released in July the 17th, 1987, it stars Peter Weller, Nancy Allen, Miguel Ferrer, Curtwood Smith, Ronnie Cox, and it was directed by Paul Verhoeven. Now the setup within Robocop is that we are set in the back then present day near future, centered in the city of Detroit, where the landscape is very much split into two sectors. On the one hand we have the big world of the mega corporate big businesses led by Omni Consumer Products, that's known as OCP, who want to take the city into the future with their futuristic projects. A major hurdle in their plans is the increasing levels of crime and lawlessness within Detroit City. So high are the levels that the police force are being overwhelmed and attacked and under-resourced, with certain cops threatening to strike. In order to combat the crime levels, the OCP want a 24-hour cop who requires no food, no drink, no water, armed with the most advanced weaponry, who can patrol the streets to take down the criminals within the city. Enter new police officer Alex Murphy, who on his first day, whilst pursuing criminals, is brutally gunned down and murdered. Using his corpse remains, OCP revive and regenerate Murphy as a cyborg named Robocop, whom with set directives proceeds to carry out the law enforcement and attack all criminals within the city. But over time Murphy begins to regain sense of his memories and his murder and goes on a quest of vengeance. Now when we talk about great movies, I always say the best ones are those that operate on multiple levels, covering various themes and subject matter whilst maintaining a compelling main narrative. And Robocop remains one of the best examples of this. The fact that it covers so much and still functions as an overall story really is what makes it one of the greatest movies of the 1980s. So in terms of the main plot, we have very much a main story of revenge mixed in with moments of pathos and sadness as we see the flashbacks through Murphy of his previous life, which very much gives an emotional weight to this film. Covers so much in terms of identity and self-discovery and self-purpose, rediscovering who you are and very much trying to regain your own humanity. Although set in the present day, there are clear futuristic science fiction tones in terms of the new Detroit vision. Robocop's design itself is very futuristic in terms of its colour and contrast. We have that silver chrome colour design, very much built as what would seem in a future world despite being set in a present day environment. The film of course has been viewed as a very cynical satire in how it represents the world of big business corporations and the ruthless streaks of CEOs and managing executives, showing these figures as real cutthroat, greedy and capitalist and opportunistic individuals. This is one of the elements that Robocop really feels relatable, and many can identify with coming across certain personalities and individuals like this in real life, even if the director has exaggerated the certain characters within this film. We then look at the police force itself and the various upheavals where we deal with certain matters in terms of labour force and employment dissatisfaction, and how truly the police department are under-resourced and overwhelmed. We have issues of employees going on strike, and we have an insight as to what would happen if indeed the police force did go on strike. What would be the overall implications in terms of the city itself? And these themes are all too relevant still after all of these years post the film's release, when dealing particularly with the George Floyd incident and with all the various debates and claims about defunding the police and whether the police brutality is too much and who will hone in the police. So again, we're looking at a movie that is so relevant many years after its release. Now Paul Verhoeven added a real world building within this movie, including all of the news reports and media coverage and advertisements, and again this adds such an intelligent, really making the film transcend the more typical genres of sci-fi and action. The film is also notorious for its extreme levels of violence. Obviously we talk about the scenes of Murphy's murder, and also where we see an executive being blown to bits literally by the Ed 209 near the beginning scenes of the film. And whilst the violence is very excessive, I wouldn't say it's gratuitous at all. It's overall very serious and quite shocking when the violence does happen, and it really does draw you into the story. It really is a major achievement by Paul Verhoeven when we comment so much of modern day film today, and we really bemoan on the fact that they are just overlong in terms of their running times, and when they get to the end of the film they don't end up saying much. It really is a marvel that Robocop manages to cover all of these very intelligent and very thought-provoking themes all under 2 hours, and it's an impressive achievement in terms of editing and screenwriting and storytelling. We then talk about the actors' performances throughout this film, all of which are all excellent. Peter Weller in the lead role as Murphy and Robocop adds enough humanity within the Robocop identity, and we give him major credit because it must have been extremely difficult acting in that big bulky suit, but there's enough empathy that he transcends through with Murphy to make us care about what happens to him throughout the film. Nancy Allen is a good supporting role as Lewis, Murphy's main partner. She's more in the beginning part of the film, and then she goes away for a bit, and then she comes back halfway through, and again it's a good combination between the two, and I think her character is key. It's just making Murphy have another human personality to bounce off. But as good as the main protagonists are within this film, Robocop for me is really driven by the three villainous characters who all really define the deeper themes that we see throughout the films. We have Ronnie Cox as Dick Jones, the current vice president of OCP, who's very eager to release his Ed 209, which is more of a tank-like construct as the major law enforcement. He finds himself being opposed and eventually surpassed by Miguel Ferrer as Bob Norton, who proposes the Robocop project as an alternative, very ambitious, younger executive. Whilst he's not as evil as I would say Dick Jones, he still has that more ruthless streak, embodying very much as what I mentioned before about the overall image in terms of business executives. We then have Curtwood Smith, who is terrific as Clarence Boddicker. He is the most notorious criminal within Detroit, having constantly killed 36 cops, and throughout the film we see how all of these three villains connect and intertwine with one another, and just captures very much of the cutthroat abrasiveness and ambition that is really running throughout the whole of this entire movie. Now, when talking about Robocop, we also have to talk about the amazing musical score from the late Basil Pildaris. I love the main theme so much of Robocop that we see throughout the film, and I also love the musical tones that he adds when we see the flashbacks of Murphy's family life. It's such an iconic score. Pildaris had already reached such high standards with, of course, the music from Conan the Barbarian, and Robocop again remains one of his best musical themes throughout his overall kit. So it's a fantastic musical score, so imposing and very cinematic along with the rest of this film. So as we know, the score of this movie is 10 out of 10 as with usual films within this review series. So we're now going to look at the overall release, and on a budget of 13.7 million, Robocop managed to gross over 53.4 million at the US box office. Many critics were praising the film's intelligence and sharp satirical perspective, as well as the good character work within the lead characters. Now yes, of course, the main excessive violence did cause some controversy amongst critics, but I don't think that took away from the overall reception and appreciation in terms of the story and the multiple themes and commentary very much on a socialistic level throughout this overall film. Now, the success of Robocop very much represented the shift in mainstream 80s cinema, where now we were seeing far more violent R-rated movies becoming the main blockbusters at the box office. So as well as Robocop in 1987 itself, we also had other iconic films such as Predator with Arnold Schwarzenegger, Lethal Weapon, which of course had Mel Gibson and Danny Glover, and also The Untouchables starring Kevin Costner and Sean Connery. And of course, this was followed up with the next year by the iconic classic Die Hard in 1988 starring Bruce Willis. Director Paul Verhoeven would impose his status as a far more adult-orientated director who was able to create more very violent and populist blockbusters. Shortly after Robocop, he would go on to direct the massive box office success of Total Recall in 1990 with Arnold Schwarzenegger, and the very controversial but hugely commercially successful Basic Instinct in 1992 starring Michael Douglas and Sharon Stone. But for all of his big films, Robocop still remains Paul Verhoeven's best work and will probably likely remain his best film overall throughout his career. It's a truly special movie, so immersive, a true classic of the 1980s again, as well as the typical themes of science fiction and action. The multiple subject matter that it covers in terms of its social commentary really is what makes Robocop such a special movie overall, and you really think under another director it would have been far more of a typical, just a B-grade shoot 'em up actioner. But I think Paul Verhoeven as a director is really what elevates this film so much, as well as the compelling performances from all of the actors, plus the iconic score from the music composer as well. All of these elements are for me what makes Robocop a truly special film of the 1980s. Now, when we look at the overall legacy of the film, it sadly spawned inferior sequels as well. We had the very terrible, for the most part, Robocop 2 in 1990, and almost just as worse Robocop 3. It also spawned TV series which I can vividly remember being shown on Sky 1. That was nothing special. We did of course have a 2014 reboot starring Alex Kinnaman alongside the likes of Michael Keaton and Samuel L. Jackson as well, and that was very much of a tame effort in comparison to this film overall, and once again shows that the real fallacy in terms of taking these iconic films from the 80s and trying to reconfigure them to a much more of a kid-friendly PG-13 audience. You really strip away what was special about the first film in the first place, so it was really a fool's errand in terms of that overall reboot. But despite all of the inferior sequels and reboots, they do nothing to take away from the impact of Robocop, and for me it's without question a 10 out of 10 movie, one of the best and greatest and most iconic films of the 1980s decade. So those are my thoughts and feelings and review of Robocop. Let me know what you think in the comments below. If there are any other films from the 80s that you feel are classics, or any other films in general that you would like to see me review, and just let me know in the comments. If I've seen those movies, then I'll of course provide a breakdown and critical review of those films as well. Please also hit and like those subscription and notification buttons so I can provide you with more high quality content like this in the future. But that's it for now. Take care of yourselves, stay at safe distances, and I will see you very, very soon.